there. I'm back. It's Sunday evening and I just did some yoga on Zoom, or I guess in the portal, as Patricia Lockwood would say. So I'm here in my sweats, but we're all friends now, so it's a safe space. So back with more. No one is talking about this, and we're still in the portal here. We're still on the internet, as it were. And I'll just pick up where I left off. Every fiber in her being strained. She was trying to hate the police. Start small and work your way up, the therapist suggested. Start by hating Officer Big Mac, a class traitor who is keeping the other residents of McDonaldland from getting the sandwiches that they need, and who, when the revolution comes, will have the burger on his head eaten for his crimes. Burger of his head, sorry, eaten for his crimes. But this insight produced in her only a fresh wave of discouragement. Her therapist was more radical than her. The thing was that her father had been a policeman, one who was known for unnecessarily strip searching the boys in her high school when he pulled them over on their drunken joyrides. This meant that it was hard for her to get dates. It also meant that when she did get dates, she was expected to take the lead. In childhood, she had lain awake at night on fire with a single question. How did French people know what they were saying? Yet when she finally asked her mother, she didn't know either, which meant the problem must be inherited. Can't learn, she Googled late at night. Can't learn since losing my virginity? Her most secret pleasures were sentences that only 0.5% of people on Earth would understand, and that no one would be able to decipher at all in 10 years. Grisly British witch pits, sex in the moon next summer. What is binch? What is to be corn-cobbed? That's the cost of my vegan lunch. Pants burn leg wound. She could not feel her first fingertip. This in the way that your ear used to get soft, pink, and pliant, and the swirls of hair around it like damp designs from talking on the telephone. Her husband would sometimes come up behind her while she was repeating the words no, 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 or help, help, help under her breath, and lay a hand on the back of her neck like a Victorian nursemaid. Are you locked in, he would ask, and she would nod, and then do the thing that always broke her out somehow, which was to Google beautiful brown pictures of roast chickens, maybe because that's what women used to do with their days. He did not have this problem, this metastasis of the word next, the word more. He took only as much as he needed of something, and that was enough. When she asked him thoughtfully what his last meal would be, he replied instantly and thoughtfully, banana, because I wouldn't want to be full when I die. 100 years ago, her cat might have been called Mittens or Pussy Willow. Now, her cat was called Dr. Butthole. There was no way out of it. Dr. Butthole, she called at night, almost in despair, until he trotted to the door with the bright feathers of her dignity clinging to his lips and disappeared in his alternating stripes over the threshold. In Bristol, the sunset dripped as if from a honeycomb. This is your contribution to society? A man asked, holding up a printout of the Can a Dog Be Twins post. Yes, she peeped. She wanted to explain that she had also popularized the concept of a sealing wax manicure, where you painted over your entire fingertip in a big, careless red blob, and that this had paved the way for 1776 core, an irony-based aesthetic where people adopted various visual signifiers of the founding fathers. But he had already turned away in disgust, tearing the printout in two as he went. Just as well. It probably wouldn't be funny to an Englishman anyways. Afterward, a boyish figure stood in line to see her. He waited till the very end. I used to read your diary, he confessed when it was finally his turn, and tears sparked in her eyes instantaneously. The diary she had written before anything had happened to her. The diary where she used to make the sort of jokes that would get people fired now. What was your name, she asked, and he told her, and a mundane ecstasy began to rush in her veins. His had been one of her very favorite lives. She remembered it in the minutest detail. The pints after work, the rides back and forth on the train, his search for even spicier curries, the imagined dimness of his apartment with its crates of obscure records, the green waving gentleness of it all. She stood up and held him. She could not help it. He felt as breakable as a link in her arms. Our mothers could not stop using horny emojis. They used the winking one with its tongue out on our birthdays. They sent us long rows of the spurting 3 droplets when it rained. We had told them 1,000 times, but they never listened. As long as they lived and loved us, as long as they had split themselves open to have us, they would send us the peach in peach season. Never send me the eggplant again, Mom, she texted. I don't care what you're cooking for dinner. 2 women on the bench next to her in the park were discussing the power of the eclipse. The theme of their discussion was, would you go blind? Would you go blind if you went outside during an eclipse and stared at the ground the whole time? Would your dogs go blind if you were walking them? Should you pull the curtains closed with a snap so your cats couldn't see? Would, one of the women advanced in a timid tone, a picture of it make you blind if you looked at it later? Would a painting of it? A paragraph that described it to the letter? If you went blind when you were very, very old, how would you know that it wasn't the eclipse that had somehow done it? Traveled along with you side by side in a black and flame silence and biding its time. Of course, when the eclipse came, the dictator stared directly into it, as if to say that nature had no dominion over him either. It was hard to know which forms of protest against the current regime were actually useful. The day after the election, her husband had woken up with the strong urge to get a face tattoo. Either I want a teardrop under my right eye, or I want them to make the whole skull visible. He settled finally on getting the words "stop it" in very small letters right near his hairline where they could hardly be seen. In remembrance of those we lost on 9/11, the hotel will provide complimentary coffee and mini muffins from 8:45 to 9:15 a.m. Previously, these communities were imposed on us, along with their mental weather. Now we chose them, or believed that we did. A person might join a site to look at pictures of her nephew and 5 years later believe in a flat earth. Strange, there were more and more stories about Nazi hunters, about women luring Nazis out to the woods with promises of sex and then shooting them, women at the gates of Auschwitz stripping to distract the guards and then wresting their guns away from them with one deft, nude move. Where had these stories been during her childhood? Those stories had mostly been about people in attics eating one potato a week. But these sex and murder in the woods stories, they would have put a different shine on things. My space was an entire life, she nearly wept at a bookstore in Chicago, and the whole audience conjured up the image of a man in a white t-shirt grinning over his shoulder, and a private music began to autoplay for each of them. And it is lost, 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 lost. In Toronto, the man she talked to so often in the portal began to speak out of his actual mouth, which produced the modern tone incarnate. I had been putting my balls online for a while. I'd post regular pictures of my garage or kitchen or whatever with increasing amounts of ball in the background. She thought, the first necessity for this conversation is that I do not ask, why would you do that? I take it for granted that at some point in the course of human events, you will see a reason to put increasing amounts of your balls online. She glanced down at his feet. He was wearing cowboy boots to be funny, as he sometimes posted pictures of himself in a 10-gallon hat with the caption, "Cowboy." He was one of the secret architects of the new shared sense of humor, the voice she was hearing in this place, intimate, that spread like a regional fire across the globe. And one night I went to a bar where a bunch of posters were meeting up, he went on. And a dude walked up to me and handed me a business card that had, "I've seen your balls" printed on it. He didn't say a single word. Then next to him, right on cue, his friend puked into a trash can. And I thought to myself, nothing will ever be funny in this way again. The food came and it was disgusting because they had ordered the worst thing on the menu on purpose, to be funny. "You could write it, you know," she said, leaning forward into a wind. "Someone could write it, but it would have to be like Jane Austen, what someone said at breakfast over cold mutton, a fatal quadrille error, the rising of the fine hackles in the drawing room. Pale, violent shadings of tone, a hair being split down to the DNA, a social novel." She looked at his profile and saw him as the blazing endpoint of a civilization. Ships on the Atlantic, the seasickness of ancestors over a churning green, the fact that he looked just like his son, whose pictures he sometimes posted. And if someone doesn't, she thought, how will we preserve it for the future? How it felt to be a man around the turn of the century posting increasing amounts of his balls online. On the way out, in a haze, she remembered she had seen some of those pictures herself, a long time ago in between glimpses of other things, but the moment to mention it had passed. He lit a cigarette, and as she took one from him to be funny, she said, "They're getting it all wrong, aren't they? Already when people are writing about it, they're getting it all wrong." "Oh, yes," he said, exhaling gently through his nostrils to be funny, in a tone that meant she was getting it wrong too. Whole subcultures sprang up on boards where people met to talk about their candida overgrowth. You stumbled across it late one night when you were idly typing in searches. Why am I tired all the time? Why can I no longer memorize a 7-minute monologue? Why is my tongue less pink than it was when I was a child? There were only 2 questions at 3 in the morning, and they were, am I dying? And does anybody really love me? You found the Candida overgrowth board, glowing its welcome along the highway of sleeplessness, and stepped through the swinging doors, which immediately shut fast behind you. You took up the Candida overgrowth language. What began as the most elastic and snappable verbal play soon emerged in jargon, and then in doctrine, and then in dogma. Your behavior was subtly modified against humiliations, chastisements, censures you might receive on the Candida overgrowth board. You anticipated arguments against you and played them out in the shower while you were soaping your hair, whose full growth potential and luster had been stymied by Candida. If a wizard of charisma appeared on the Candida overgrowth boards, one who spurred the other members to greater and greater heights of rhetoric and answer back in improvisation, the Candida board might conceivably birth a new vernacular, one that the rest of the world at first didn't understand, and which was then seen to be the universal language. Also, you might leave your husband for that guy. The next morning, your eyes were gritty and your tongue even less pink than it had been before, and the people who filtered past you at your job were less real than the vivid scroll of the board dedicated to the discussion of Candida overgrowth, which didn't even exist. Picture of a new species of tree frog that had recently been discovered. Scientists speculated that the reason it had never been before seen was because, quote, it is covered with warts and it wants to be left alone. Me, unbelievably me, me. All right, I think that's a good place to stop for today. She's really going in hard after how absurd and how excessive and random things on the internet are. So stay tuned for another day, and I hope you are keeping well and staying warm.